Football Convos number 8, Leigh Steinberg.
What's important is to have a true caring for athletes and to have a vision as to how you can improve and enhance the athlete's life, and together you can improve and enhance the world.
For daily conversations with the players, coaches, and contributors that make this game great.
Regulators, mount up! We're coming!
Football Convos. Here's your host, Andy Carlson.
Very pleased to be joined now on Football Convos by super agent himself, Leigh Steinberg. He's on Twitter at Leigh Steinberg, all one word. How are you today, Leigh?
Doing great, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Founder of Steinberg Sports Entertainment, 40-plus years repping athletes, brands, and celebrities. The real Jerry Maguire. Now, do you still get people asking you about that?
Not more than every day. Wherever I go, people want me to either they want to say, show me the money, or they want me to say it to them. So the amazing thing about our film is that it held up so that it's still shown on commercial television all these years later. And but it was an interesting experience. Cameron Crowe, the director, followed me around for a couple of years, and he went to the NFL draft, and he went to league meetings in Palm Desert, and he came to pro scouting days and games and Super Bowl parties, and I told him lots of stories.
Now, it's amazing that the film is kind of dated now, that a huge contract for a wide receiver would be 4 years, $11 million, like Tidwell got at the end of the movie.
It's stunning, and it's all occasioned by the massive increases in television revenue. The contracts have just skyrocketed because of the fact that the NFL a couple of weeks ago had the 7 top-rated shows on Nielsen for all of television. Now, there's never been a time where all 7 top slots were occupied by anything, much less football, NFL, nighttime. So this game has completely surpassed everything else in this country, not just as a sport, but as a television show.
Diving into it already, now, do you think that there will come a certain level where, a certain glass ceiling where they can't expand any farther, or do you think there's still going to be room for growth of the game?
As long as you have competitive networks that are trying to get recognition for their Monday through Friday broadcast lineups, so the real play is the ultimate value of the network, they'll spend loss leader economics on rights fees because sports delivers an audience and they can show their promos. So we're not seeing less new networks, we're seeing more. And as long as there are more networks competing, the dollars don't necessarily follow rational economics in that they don't make enough money in advertising to recoup what they paid for the rights fees. But I see this continuing for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, in a couple of years, it will be Thursday Night Football only on Google+.
There's really no end to the ways in which social media and the fact that we now have content flowing on cellular phones, on iPads, on a television monitor can be used to watch almost anything. So the answer is this explosion in multiple networks, this explosion in alternative television programming, all augurs well for the NFL.
All right, so we jumped the shark a little bit. Let's backtrack. Leigh, I wanted to have you on so we could get to your story, especially football-wise. So where did it all start for you?
I went my freshman year to UCLA, but then it was the late 60s, and it was all happening in Berkeley. So I went there undergrad, was student body president, went to law school, was a dorm counselor in an undergraduate dorm. And while I was working my way through law school, they moved the freshman football team into the dorm. One of the students was Steve Bartkowski, and in 1975 he became the first player selected in the NFL draft. And I had been out of law school for a couple of years traveling, and before I had a chance to take a regular legal job, Bartkowski asked me to represent him. There were two leagues fighting then, the World Football League against the NFL, and we ended up with the largest rookie contract in NFL history, and it eclipsed Joe Namath and O.J. Simpson. So here we were, straight out, largest contract ever, and I saw then that as we get to Atlanta and there are Klieg lights flashing in the sky and long billboards that are talking about Bart's arrival, I saw that it was sports in a lot of communities across the country that created they were the movie stars, they were the celebrities. And I thought my dad had two core values. One was to treasure relationships, especially family, and the second was to try to make a meaningful, positive difference in the world, help people who could not help themselves. So I saw that athletes could be role models, and they could trigger imitative behavior. So I started by asking if each person I represented would go back to the high school community, set up a scholarship fund, put down roots, then go to the collegiate level where a Troy Aikman or Eric Karros or Edgerrin James or Steve Young endowed full scholarships at their universities. And then at the pro level, challenged each athlete to find some cause in their own life that they would like to tackle. And then we put a foundation together with the leading business, political, and community leaders that would help propel it. So, for example, Warwick Dunn's just put the 139th single mother and her family into the first home they'll ever own by making down payment
that's
and
an amazing
having
story.
Home Depot outfit it.
It's just an amazing story about what Warwick Dunn does for single mother families.
So the point was then that allowed me to profile athletes and only represent those that would be willing to try to make a positive difference. And it also was a genesis for second career. So they were able to use the relationships utilized that they had made over their charitable work to set the stage for second career. So Warwick Dunn now is a minority owner of the Atlanta Falcons. The first one I did, Deron Cherry, a retired safety for Kansas City, ended up being the first retired player to be a minority owner of a team, the Jacksonville Jaguars, in like 30 or 40 years. And then we did the same thing with Ray Childress. So whether it's television like Troy Aikman or Steve Young or Desmond Howard or business, the whole goal is to make sure that they're prepared for life after sports.
Now, a lot of people kind of find that hard to believe because when they think sports agent, they think all of the flash and the pomp and circumstance, but it sounds like you're really getting invested into these guys' lives and making sure that they're set up even beyond football and also giving back to where they came from.
Well, the model is you take a Warren Moon who set a scholarship fund up at his high school, at the University of Washington. The Crescent Moon Foundation has sent hundreds of kids to college on his scholarships. He runs a successful business. He does the color for the Seattle Seahawks and is still involved with a series of charities. So the goal is to create enough experience away from the field and enough relationships and enough positive brand that athletes who are in their late 30s then go on to very happy and fulfilled lives.
Now, you did a TED Talk, and it was titled Making an Impact in the World Through Sports. Was that the cornerstone? And then what else can people make an impact in this world?
Well, for example, take an issue like bullying. You have kids traumatized in high school because they don't look perfect, they're not socially adept, whatever. And you have a whole phenomenon of bullying where those people are made to feel very bad about themselves, and then that carries over for life. Athletes are in a superb position to to combat that because they sit at the top of the high school hierarchy. Everyone wants to be like them. So if they are promoting tolerance instead of bullying, you can make a real difference. I had Lennox Lewis cut a public service announcement that said real men don't hit women. So when it comes to an issue like domestic violence, a athlete can permeate the perceptual screen of a younger person who doesn't listen to any authority figures, parents, or anybody else, but because that athlete's so big and macho, he can deliver a message. We have a Sporting Green Alliance, which is an effort to use sports to combat climate change. So I've aggregated technologies in water, solar, recycling, resurfacing, and you take it into a stadia or another venue or a practice field, and it can drop carbon emissions and energy costs and then transform that venue into a educational platform. So the millions of fans that come can see a waterless urinal or a solar panel. Think about how they can use these concepts in their own lives. Or the issue of concussion, which was a crisis of conscience for me back in the 80s, and we've now held multiple concussion conferences, and I'm helping with some new technologies as well as raising awareness.
Now, how do you think the NFL has come around since the concussion issue is in the forefront nowadays, especially with the class action concussion lawsuits and greater emphasis on head injuries? How do you think they've come around lately?
Well, there's been some changes. There's baseline testing. There are better rules to protect players and stop using the head and neck for blocking or tackling or targeting it. So it's certainly better than it was before. But I held a concussion conference back in the early 90s before the issue was as front and center as it is right now. And we had players like Troy Aikman and Steve Young and Drew Bledsoe come and at least listen to what the state of the art was. And we did another one back in 2006, and then we had neurologists who told us that 3 or more is a magic number, and after that you have an exponentially higher risk of Alzheimer's, ALS, premature senility, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and depression. So at that time I called it a ticking time bomb and an undiagnosed health epidemic. So I now believe this, that every time an offensive lineman hits a defensive lineman at the inception of each play, it produces a low-level subconcussive hit. No one's knocked out. So you could have an offensive lineman leave football with 10,000 subconcussive hits, none of which have been diagnosed and none of which he's aware of, but the aggregate of which is going to do serious long-term damage to his brain. So if 50% of the mothers in this country knew these facts and told their kids, you can play any sport but not tackle football, it wouldn't kill pro football. It just would change the socioeconomics, so you would have people that playing it that do things like boxing, using it to escape from economic poverty, knowing that there are disastrous long-term consequences.
Do you think the concussion issue will tangibly affect the NFL in about 25 years down the line, or do you think safety issues, rule changes will be enough to keep it as is down the line?
I don't think it'll take 25 years for the pressure on this to build. The injuries are occurring every day, and players are getting impacted, so it's now not 20 years later. We're seeing players at the end of their career show the symptoms. I think that we need to be more aggressive in education for young kids, not using the head or neck, better blocking and tackling techniques. The rules changes are good. I've been exploring different helmet technologies. That one called Take Technology reduces the blow to the head through a coil and compression system that attenuates the energy wave and drops by 50% the amount of force that comes in. That kind of thing will be a breakthrough. There are now post-concussion treatments, one done by Dr. Jake Van Landingham of Prevacus, where you apply a nasal spray immediately after the hit, and it drops the amount of swelling. And ultimately, they're going to have to find ways to heal the brain, either through nutraceuticals or pharmaceuticals. So every one of these efforts, and there are new technologies that can be used on the sidelines to diagnose a low-level subconcussive event. So the science keeps getting better. Ultimately, stem cell research will probably be the answer, because there are people who feel that the right stem cells inserted in the brain can clear up the damage. But it's a major issue, and it's just sitting there. I love football. I think it teaches a lot of core values, but not at the price of living 20 years, in dementia.
Absolutely. And your book, The Agent, My 40-Year Career Making Deals and Changing the Game, came out last year. What's your favorite story from the book?
Oh, gosh. It's got fun things from growing up at the edge of Hollywood around some of the major movie stars. It's got me and Governor Reagan duking it out on campus at Berkeley during the 60s. It's got the whole rise of there really wasn't agentry when I started, and so it's presenting Warren Moon at the Hall of Fame. It's watching Steve Young or Troy Aikman win a Super Bowl. It's all the behind-the-scenes stories. And then there's a very strong element of talking about, for people who'd like to enter the field, what being an agent is all about. And then a lot of really heartwarming role modeling stories. And I also talk about a fight I had with alcoholism and how I recovered.
And you mentioned your battle with alcoholism. What was the lowest point for you?
The lowest point was 2010, where I had basically cascaded down at the end, and I would usually drink by myself, to the point where I had closed my office, I had shuttered my apartment, I'm living back at my mom's house, and my best thought at that point was how I could find more vodka. And I had a moment of clarity, decided I'd put everything else to the side and focus on sobriety, and so I would be a good father and I'd be sober, if nothing else. And in March, that'll be 5 years.
I was going to say, clean sober for 5 years, that's very commendable, Leigh.
Thanks.
And also from the book, I got to ask you, the Ryan Leaf story. Now, there's been some pushback on that, Bill Polian notably, but walk us through that real quick.
The funniest thing to me was, with all the interesting stories in the book, that which was pretty minor ended up, because Peyton Manning was in the Super Bowl. All I did is talk about the fact that athletes have always expressed opinions on where they would like to go or not in the draft. Now, the draft was not handed down by God to Moses on Mount Sinai. It's not part of the Magna Carta or the U.S. Constitution. It's a control system that fundamentally limits a player's ability to do what you or me or anyone else can do, which is to choose where we want to work based on our own values, what's important, geographical location, or or the quality of coaching or ownership. So anyway, I asked Ryan at one point, Indianapolis was first, San Diego was second, where was he happy enough to go to Indianapolis? Now, in retrospect, you look at that like, whoa, Indianapolis wasn't seriously considering not drafting Peyton Manning. That's not how it looked in 1998. Peyton Manning looked like, he might be a system quarterback, who was limited, and Ryan Leaf looked like he had a big upside. So he said, I would love to go to San Diego. I said, well, I'm not suggesting this, but the only way I could think of is if you wouldn't show up at the combine to the Indianapolis Colts meeting. I said, I wouldn't do it, but so he went ahead and did it, and and that was that. And but that sort of thing goes on all the time behind the scenes. I didn't think I was raising anything, and besides, they should put a statue up to me if we were doing something, because they should put a statue up in Indianapolis, because guess what? They got Peyton Manning.
That's not a bad way to get him set up. And you're right. People who weren't paying attention to football back in '98 forget how close 1A and 1B Ryan Leaf and Peyton Manning were.
Right, and there were the same thing had come 5 years prior, where the two top quarterbacks were Rick Meyer and Drew Bledsoe. Mm-hmm. And Meyer was much more prolific at Notre Dame than Bledsoe was. But Bledsoe had the higher upside, so it looked like the same analogy. That was not the brightest choice I ever made in terms of clients.
It happens. But Drew Bledsoe, one of your clients, by the way, right?
So I ended up representing Drew. Mm. Drew went on to be the first pick in the draft. Meyer was, I think, second. But Meyer had an ineffective pro career, and Bledsoe went to Pro Bowls, took the team to the Super Bowl, and had a really good career. And then when he got injured, made way for Tom Brady.
Oh, there you go. Who's the toughest NFL front office man you ever had to negotiate with?
Not even close. Well, there's a couple. But Bill Polian already hates agents enough, so we'll leave him alone. Mike Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. I had the first-round draft pick of the Bengals in 1987, 1992, 1993, 1994, 1995, and 1999. And I came to the conclusion that if I was representing astronauts, Mike Brown would have the only franchise on the moon. So it was he took the position for years. They were in a smaller market, and they didn't care what the rest of the league paid. They were going to pay what Cincinnati wanted to pay. Oh. And so I abhor holdouts. I worked really hard to never have a player late to camp. 90% of my holdouts came with one team.
And that had to be frustrating, because during that time you were getting all the top clients, and then Cincinnati was always picking towards the top of the draft because they were the Bengals.
One after another, and it was very difficult. And when a player's at a camp, you feel awful, because you know that if it's a quarterback or if it's offensive lineman, they need that time. Mm-hmm. And so the point is that those situations were agonizing. Now we have the salary cap. There's very little negotiability. Everyone's in camp on time.
All right, Leigh. We got to get off the field, so let's go with the 3 and out, which is a list of 3 quick-fire questions to bring us on home. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. First, who was the most influential on your career?
What you just sounded like? You just sounded like Cash Cab, that TV on that show on television where the cab driver is, and he says, "Okay, you got these questions. You ready?" Well, anyway, yeah.
I love that show. When my wife and I were in New York, we were hoping, come on, get in the Cash Cab.
You just strolled up and down for hours looking for the Cash Cab.
All right. Anywho, first one, who was the most influential on your career?
My father initially, because of his values.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I got into it, Warren Moon, who I was with for 23 years, because he wasn't only a client. He had great values, great advice, taught me a lot. We sort of grew up together.
Mm-hmm.
Back from 1978, he ended up playing 6 years in Canada and 17 in the NFL.
Yep.
And that was a situation where very often the lawyer agent asks advice of the player.
That's very interesting. What's the one piece of advice that you give to someone who'd want to follow in your footsteps as a sports agent?
That it's highly competitive, but what's important is to have a true caring for athletes and to have a vision as to how you can improve and enhance the athlete's life, and together you can improve and enhance the world. To have a strong philosophy and to understand who it is in the world you'll appeal to and try to profile your clients.
And lastly, what's a book recommendation for us? Football, life, or otherwise?
Oh, my God, there's so many of them. In football, Darren Heitner wrote a really good book that talks about, how to be a football agent or football lawyer. Obviously, I've written Winning with Integrity and The Agent. But I think that all sports books are like sports movies, can be fascinating because they start with crisis or a difficulty. They can involve someone that could give up and be hopeless, and then they lead to, aspiration, and then that leads to ultimate triumph. So they're all stories. I just saw a movie, Whiplash, that's about a drummer, but it actually has great applicability to sports. How much are you willing to sacrifice to be at the top, and then what's the right way to coach?
Gotcha. Leigh, what's next from you? What should the good people be excited for?
Well, I'm doing a radio show on Yahoo Sports Radio every week, and I write columns for Forbes and Rant, and we're about to do a new internet magazine that'll be called Game Changer. My book's still selling. We have a Super Bowl party coming up, which will be my 28th, I think. And we usually find a charity. We're going to do Wounded Warriors. And we're currently recruiting new athletes. So our business has changed. It's now not just the athletes, but sports theme, motion pictures, television, video games, health and vitality products. It's a very exciting time. I feel blessed every day.
That's awesome, Leigh. And again, congratulations on sobriety. It sounds like you've really got your life in order now.
Thank you. One day at a time.
There we go. And all this information will be available on our Football Convos page. But Leigh, the time flew. I just want to thank you very much for taking some time out and talking to Football Convos. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure. Good luck to you.
Thanks for listening to Football Convos. For more daily football conversations, visit footballconvos.com or visit us at iTunes.